I'd like to move on to the keynote presentation entitled Strategies for Soil Health in Commercial Veggie Production, Lessons Learned from Year 1 of the Trial. And we'll have 3 speakers. Joel Betts has been the conservation planner managing this. Mike Davidian is the farmer whose land this is happening on. And Breton has been our intern who's supporting the other pieces of this. And thank you for that, Breton, as well. So without further ado, I'd appreciate Joel and Breton and Mike taking over.
Yeah, and I think Mike's going to introduce this, so I'll leave it to Mike. I saw that he just hopped on. Mike, you've got your video and audio working?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Everybody can hear me?
I hear you well. Hello.
All right. So, yeah, thank you, everybody. It looks like we have a really good turnout tonight. That's wonderful. So just to kind of, before we get into the slides, just to give you a little bit of background. So our farm is a conventional growing farm. We're 100 years plus in agriculture. I make up the 4th generation on our farm. And about 4 years ago, I was introduced to Bob and just started kind of going over because I wanted to do things a little bit different. So Bob was crucial in helping us kind of becoming more sustainable, whether it be through water management practices or cover crops, which in turn is kind of water management practices, utilizing compost and more sustainable amendments. We've kind of taken this to the next level. So that's where, you know, I've been kind of thinking about, I saw this machine a couple of years ago, and I kind of been always thinking about, could this do what we're kind of trying to prove it can do, and set out on this path of kind of, I call it like a hybrid. It's not organic. It's not traditional, conventional. It's kind of like a more sustainable conventional. So that's kind of the background of where we're kind of coming up with, can this work? And hopefully we can prove it will. So this year, the goals were essentially taking a traditional practice, which if any of you have a backyard garden, you've probably figured out pretty quickly that if you can use some kind of buffer on the soil to keep the weeds out, makes your life a lot easier. So we try to accomplish that using biodegradable plastic mulch. So traditionally we would go out, plow the field, then we'll finish the soil with like a smoothing apparatus, and then we'll lay the plastic. Well, any of us know that the more times you till the soil, the more carbon you're going to release from the soil. You're also going to disturb the natural biology of the soil and make it easier for the nutrients to leach out. So I was trying to figure out, okay, if we can disturb the soil less with a machine, would that in fact maybe not disrupt the soil natural biology and chemistry as much? So this machine that you see, I don't know if you can zoom in on it, but essentially what it is it's like a rototiller with a plastic layer on the back. It's obviously a little bit more in depth than that, but essentially that's what it is. So we're trying to see if we could get this to work. It's great as far as a conservation practice. If we can prove that, all right, we're stabilizing nutrient, we're keeping more moisture in the soil, and retaining carbon. So that's one side of it. And then the other side is the production side. If I don't have to plow my field, till it again, and then go back through with another apparatus, one, it's quicker. And two, it saves, we have a lot of stones, so it saves me on that. It saves time. And nowadays, as everybody is understanding with the labor shortage, time is money. And in order to be a sustainable farm these days, you have to figure out how to reduce your bottom line. So this is a twofold project that I'm trying to, one, have a conservation side of it, see if I can produce more product. Because essentially, as a production farmer, this is the bottom line. I want to produce more product with less inputs. And through conservation practices, I'm able to do that. 2, I also want to be on the land less, because that'll, again, make my profit margins higher. It's more profitable. So these are the commercial side of agriculture that I want you guys aware of, why I think this is a very important project. So, all right, I think we can go to the goals. All right.
Kind of a comparison here on the left, the conventional and then the FORIGO machine on the right.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, some of this I kind of hit too, less time in the soil, less soil disturbance. Anything else you want to add to this?
Yeah, I would say so. So one of the pros of this FORIGO machine is that you might, as Mike was saying, be able to have fewer tractor passes. So on the conventional practice, you got 6 to 8 tractor passes in the planning process, which every pass is a little bit more compaction, it's a little bit more disturbance, it's more emissions. So you've got 6 to 8 passes. You've got your flail mower to get rid of the cover crop, 2 to 4 harrows depending on the soil condition, then your bed shaper, plastic dripper. Here you see, and then you've got a transplanter. So that's a number of them. And with this new equipment, you could, you have the flail mower, and then the FORIGO machine actually takes the cover once it's been mowed and integrates it in one pass, various stones. So you don't need to go through with a harrow a bunch of times, and it shapes the bed itself like that. So that's kind of, that's why we thought, less fuel, less emissions, less disturbance, less compaction. That's kind of what we're testing out to see, well, does it work? Because that'd be great.
Yeah. All right. So if you go to the next slide, so we got this through the CIG grant from NRCS, which kindly you guys helped sponsor us with that. And I think it's going to be a great project in the whole. I think as we go through this, you're going to find this year was a extremely challenging year. And I don't think it's going to be a accurate depiction of what our findings should be. So all in all, go to the next slide.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Take over from here. But I guess, Mike, I don't know if you had thoughts on the grant process before we move on, but to kind of some of the technical background, but.
What do you want as far as the grant process? How cumbersome it is?
Yeah. Well, so no, I'll talk briefly for a second about the SIG as well. So this is a specific kind of grant, within an NRCS that is for kind of projects to address specific resource concerns, specific issues that and projects that don't quite fit into like the general EQIP or CSP or other conservation programs that aren't maybe not as well established practices that people are interested in learning. Well, do they work, and does this benefit soil health? Well, we don't know enough, to pay for this on a large scale through EQIP, but maybe we will if we find it out through this program. So that's kind of where this idea came out. And Mike approached Bob, who approached the Conservation District, to try to kind of propose this project because it didn't really fit in any of the categories under EQIP or under CSP or these other programs. So yeah, that's just a little bit more. But I'll take from here, just talking a little bit more about how we frame these things. So NRCS kind of talks about conservation issues in terms of resource concerns. So an existing or expected degradation of the soil, water, air, plant, or animal resources based on the sustainability or intended use of that resource being impaired. And what we're talking about for soil health resource concerns are compaction, organic matter depletion, soil and organism habitat loss or degradation. So, the loss of the life of the soil, aggregate instability, that soil structure breaking down, or sheet and rill erosion, for example, you see in this picture here. And so we're trying to avoid those. And that was a priority for the SIG funding around this time. And we're hoping that this new equipment combined with, using a living cover in the aisles versus a weed mat would benefit soil health and reduce these resource concerns. And just a little bit of background here on soil health. So the general principles that NRCS holds for soil health are that you've got to maximize continuous living roots on the soil, so reducing the amount of bare soil in the cropping season in the schedule. Maximize diversity on the landscape, so as many different kinds of covers, maybe even moving livestock through landscape can improve the soil biology, improve soil health. And these things both feed the soil biology. And then minimizing disturbance, so minimizing the amount of equipment that might be compacting or harrowing or breaking up the soil structure, and then maximizing cover in general, keeping that soil covered. Those things both protect both the soil organic matter and the soil habitat. So these are kind of our 4 soil health principles that we strive for. And an important part of that is that soil biology is the key to soil function. So we're not just talking about, a medium to grow plants in. We're talking about something that's alive. It's an ecosystem. You can see that in this picture here. You've got this cover, you've got these fungal mycelium all throughout here, these, amazing aggregates of soil that are just full of bacteria. This soil is alive. There's millions of organisms in just a handful, even just a teaspoon of soil, especially healthy soil. And so, we're trying to figure out practices within conventional agriculture as well as alternative organic smaller scale that can, that can benefit soil health and feed that soil biology. Some of the things I pointed out, and that's throughout the soil profile, but typically in soil health, we're focusing on the top soil, the top 6 to 8 inches where most of the plant growth happens. But clearly, it's throughout the whole soil profile as well. And so there's actually been soil testing developed for soil health, which is pretty cool and something that we were interested in with our soil testing program at WCCD. And so, we've been doing for a long time these standard nutrient tests that look at nutrients, maybe whether or not there's contamination. They look at organic matter sometimes, which is kind of a starting point for soil health. But they don't get that in depth, right? You're thinking about pH also. So we've been, focusing on, well, how can we develop testing for some of these other features of the soil that create healthy soil? So aggregate stability, soil carbon, active carbon, respiration, bioavailable nitrogen. Some of these things, that relate to organic matter cycling and soil structure, carbon in the soil, microbe activity, the amount of nitrogen that's actually available for plants. So I'll get into these for a second here and explain what I mean by those, because these are some of the things that that we tested for in this project. So aggregate stability, you can see these soil aggregates here, is basically the ability of the soil to hold up when it gets wet, or better yet, kind of defined as the soil being able to hold its structure and hold water, hold organic matter, have a lot of pores for life to live in. You can see that here. So that's what we're talking about with aggregate stability. This is a high aggregate stability. This is a low aggregate stability soil when added with water. And that soil structure is really important for soil biology. Organic matter is the richness of the soil, the amount of carbon in there, the amount of organic matter in the soil. Total carbon is just the total amount of actual carbon in there, versus active carbon is the amount that's available to microbes. So they're kind of, all 3 of these things can be tested where they're subtly different, but basically you can see by this image here, this is a high organic matter soil in forest, hasn't been disturbed. This is a low organic matter soil. It's been disturbed a lot by heavy, intense agriculture. You can see how well those hold up in their aggregates. Also microbial respiration, the amount of microbes in the soil that are it's a symptom of how alive the soil is. So we can test for that, which is pretty cool. So, the amount of biological activity in the soil. And so, we're trying to think in this project, well, how can we come up with some of these soil health solutions for row vegetables? Well, a few that have been done in the past, some people use plastic cover with permanent larger mowed aisles. Well, we couldn't do that in this project because you have to have a pretty big aisle, and we want to have, conventional is a lot closer together, and there's too much disturbance to kind of keep the cover alive permanently. So that didn't quite work, even though that's something like what we're going for. Cover crops in the off season. Well, we already do that, or they already do that on the farm. They plant cover crops when time permits to protect the soil in the winter. So that's great. There's already a lot of people doing, and I believe on Davidian's farm as well, they do no-till sweet corn and pumpkins. So you can see in these pictures here an example of that, where you grow rye or another dense cover crop in the fall into the spring, kill it by a variety of different methods depending on its growth stage when you want to plant, and that provides kind of a natural weed suppression and a mat that you can plant into, which is great. But that doesn't work for shaped bed vegetable production either, because you're laying drip tape, you're shaping your beds, you're burying stones or moving stones, so you can't do that same kind of seed drilling approach into that. What do you do in this situation if you want to incorporate cover crops into the growing? You have skinny rows here. Well, that's what we're trying to figure out with this project. Anything you'd like to add there before I get into some of the?
No, I think you're nailing it. So yeah. Okay,
so now Breton's going to talk a little bit about how we set up these trials.
Yeah, so to the right, you can see the design we used. This is the fields. So there's two halves. The right half had crimson clover planted in the fall the season before, or the season before this spring. And then the left half had peas and oats planted that spring, so this recent spring. So each half was split into 3 treatment sections, each with 6 rows of vegetables, separated by the tractor roads. And then starting from the furthest left, you can see conventional tillage with weed mat. That's what the farm would normally use for squash production. And then the one over, you can see we use the FORIGO stone barrier, no weed mat, and then TEF living cover. So that one is testing out a living cover between the vegetables, and then TEF is like a summer grass. And then another one over, you can see the FORIGO stone barrier, and then the weed mat and no living cover. And then in the next field, it's basically the same thing as the first field. So conventional tillage, weed mat, but this is with the crimson clover. And then the FORIGO stone barrier, no weed mat, and then we left it with fallow living cover. So that's basically just weeds. And then the one over, FORIGO stone barrier, and then a weed mat. So the idea is to compare the living cover to the aisle, living cover in the aisle to the weed mat, conventional tillage and plastic layer to tillage with the FORIGO equipment and plastic layer. Go to the next slide. Or actually, if you go back, those are just examples of the fields, which I think Joel was kind of pointing to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
And so a few of the things that we tested for were aggregate stability, water holding capacity. These are some of the things that Joel already explained: organic matter, total carbon, active carbon, total nitrogen, microbial respiration, pH, and nutrients. So we collected 3 samples in every treatment section, which is 2 rows, which is basically just 10 holes that we dug and collected a sample from. And one subsample is, or one like mini sample is a 6x2 kind of rectangle of dirt. So you can kind of imagine like a slice of cake or something. And that's to get the top layer of soil, which is another thing Joel pointed out. And then if we dug 10 holes in a treatment section, then that was averaged to be a sample in that area. And the main idea is that there are 3 samples per treatment for each area. And so the crimson clover, which was on the right side, came back pretty well. So a crimson clover cover crop provides a nitrogen boost in the soil. It attracts pollinators. So you can see there was tons of bees in the field when we visited. It adds biomass. It provides erosion control throughout all stages of it being there. So we saw lots of bees, and we also saw really well-developed root nodules, which is related to the nitrogen and the nutrient cycling. And then the peas and oats. So the oats take up excess nutrients. They outcompete weeds. They're natural pest deterring compounds in the roots. They also provide a lot of erosion control during growing and after mowing. They also add biomass and organic matter to the soil. The peas are excellent nitrogen producers. They also provide erosion control, which obviously was a big deal this summer. They add biomass and organic matter, and these also produced a crop that was harvested and sold at the farm stand. And then this was flail mowed in July and formed a nice dense, like 2 to 4 inch mat of debris that protected the field from erosion and provided weed suppression until the summer planting.
Great, thanks, Breton. And I don't know if it was mentioned, if you have questions about any of this, please put them in the chat, and we'll have a question and answer session in about 10 minutes here at the end of the presentation. And so I wanted to first talk a little bit about some of the soil testing results that we had, and then Mike's going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned and the challenges that we experienced this year. But I used a specific kind of graph that I want to quick explain. These are called box plots, but the important thing to know is that you've got your variable here on the left. In this case, we were looking at aggregate stability on a scale of 0 to 100. And the black line is the average, and this is the variability around the average. So when you see these box plots, it's not just one measurement, not just one soil sample, it was multiple. In this case, the whole field won, where spring planted peas and oats were. In this case, the whole field 2 where fall planted crimson clover were. So that's 9 composite samples. So that's why you have this variation, but the average is here. And so interestingly, just for our spring soil testing, which is going to be a baseline that will be tested against in 2024 at the end of the project, aggregate stability ranged quite a bit, but averaged right around a medium to high rating. But interestingly enough, we had higher aggregate stability in the second field where there had been an overwintered cover crop, whereas the oats weren't planted till mid-May, I believe, or maybe early May, the peas and oats. So, maybe this is just due to background use of the fields, but it also could be something here that we have higher aggregate stability where there's a really well-developed cover crop going into the fall, or going into the spring from the fall where that crimson clover was. So that was kind of an interesting result. So we'll test against all these baseline measurements in 2024 for aggregate stability. And you can see that varied, in our 6 different treatments, 3 in the first field, 3 in the second field. That varied a little bit throughout the field as well, but aggregate stability was highest in the far corner, which was interesting. So that's, I'll get more into some of the comparisons across the season here, but that's just a quick kind of description of what these graphs are. Interestingly enough, field 2, which had that overwintered crimson clover, also had higher organic matter, which you can see here. I had higher total nitrogen, which makes sense because we actually we fertilized that field, and it was had active crimson clover fixing nitrogen. So that's an interesting result. And then also higher microbial respiration, perhaps due to the heavier cover of crimson clover, more root activity, maybe due to that nitrogen input. But that was kind of an interesting result as well. And then a lower pH just due to past management. And so I wanted to kind of focus on these other results. So we did a second round of sampling just for microbial activity and active carbon in the fall. And we can see respiration was lower as it would be expected after a summer of growing. And that's mostly probably dictated by temperature. It also could have to do with nutrient availability. But there was lower, biological activity, microbial respiration in September than there was in June.
Joel.
Yeah.
On the microbial respiration, while you're talking about it, would the extreme water have something to do with that?
It could. Yeah, it could have leached nutrients away. It could have saturated the soil. If it's wet and it's been cold, that can have more of an impact on all of those things. So, there's a number of factors that the water could have,
because I just
caused
noticed
lower microbial respiration. But I think that's the most. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you just took the sample in June, just before the floodgates opened.
I did. Yep. And it had been hot. So my guess is this is nothing too special. It's just temperature related. It had been hot for a few weeks here. It had been cool for a few weeks here. That tends to impact respiration. So, the best thing to do would be in 3 years to sample respiration, in the same kind of weather situation to see if there's a big change. But also what we did was we sampled for respiration and carbon between some of our treatments. So I'll get into that in a second. Looking at the difference between microbial respiration in conventional versus the FORIGO equipment, you can see that there was a much bigger difference between the conventional than the FORIGO. So it seems like it's possible that the FORIGO tillage, allowed for a higher microbial activity in the soil than the conventional tillage, which is interesting and something we might have hoped for or expected. So, you could maybe take away from that as a possible finding that you have, higher, less impact to the soil biology from that FORIGO machine than from the conventional equipment. But we'll have to, I think more testing in the future will tell that. There was also a lot more active carbon. So that's bioavailable, ready to go carbon in late September than under the cover crop in June. And I find that interesting because we incorporated all that cover crop with both pieces of equipment. And so, that's probably a direct result of that. You're adding organic matter to the soil. You've got a season of growth. You've got a season of breaking down. So there's, carbon being added to the soil, and we found evidence of that from, between June and September. So that's the opposite of that trend in respiration. So that's an indicator of soil health increasing throughout the growing season, even, in just one season, which is great. And that actually wasn't very different between the two treatments. So you can see here, conventional in June, conventional in September, the FORIGO equipment in June, the FORIGO equipment in September, pretty much the same averages, right? Pretty much the same pattern. Maybe there's a bigger jump here, but none of that was statistically significant, so I don't want to make any big conclusions there. I think it's pretty similar. So, maybe, incorporating cover crop with this equipment versus incorporating it with the conventional equipment isn't too different, at least in terms of the amount of carbon being added to the soil. It was also a wet year, so we didn't get that high temperatures and dry, stuff working out that carbon, but the soil carbon also changes throughout a long period of time. So we'll see in 3 years if there's some differences. That'll be interesting. And then one other really interesting result was that within September, the living aisles, both the weeds and the teff, this is the average of that, had a higher microbial respiration than under the plastic row or under the weed mat. And weed mat had the lowest respiration rate versus, under the plastic in the row itself versus the living aisle. So that was a result we kind of expected, and it was interesting to see that. And then with active carbon, we didn't see any big change in that. Even though it increased over the season throughout the whole field due to incorporating organic matter, we did not see a change in or a difference between the living aisle, the plastic row, and the weed mat. There was a lot more variation within the living aisle, but not too much we can draw from that conclusion as far as the carbon goes. There's more we could have tested for, but I didn't want to break the bank with it, so we didn't do a full suite of testing in the fall. Just focused on these two things. So, we'll sample again in 2024 or fall of 2023, depending on how the grant goes, and compare all of those soil health metrics and be able to better see whether or not over the long term this FORIGO equipment builds soil health, as well as the living cover in the aisles. So I wanted to move on to a few lessons learned and some of the issues with the season. So Mike, we've got about 5 minutes or so to go through this, some of this stuff.
All right, so you tell me I'm under the gun. No, long story short.
It's important though. This is the meat of it. So
yeah, so I don't think anybody who lived in the Northeast, you all understand what it was. It was the most rain I've ever seen in my 45 years. And really for this project, we kind of, at the beginning, we were kind of forced to drag our feet as all the background stuff got going. We weren't really accepted for the project until about, May. I want to say we finally got the okay to start. So that was, a little bit disheartening by the time we got going. The first plot, when did we plant that? Do you remember, Joel, when we laid that plastic? I want to say that was the end of May.
Late June. This plastic.
Late June. Okay. Yeah.
Mid-June. Yeah, we had the clover in there till at least mid-June.
Yeah. So then we got that down and that worked out okay. What we found out was the machine isn't as great at chewing up the residue as I hoped. So that first plot was a crimson clover and there was some rye that kind of got in there, but for the most part, it was a majority of crimson clover. And I actually went through it with a flail mower. So as you can imagine, it was chewed up pretty good. And it just struggled to incorporate the heavy residue of the clover, which I was pretty shocked at. But we suffered through it. And of course, it was a new piece of machinery too. So there was a lot of learning curve to that. Constantly trying to set it up. It's got a million different settings. So we fine-tuned it. And I think by the end, we were getting a pretty good bed. It probably wasn't as consistent as what it would have been in conventional, but it was good. So while that was happening, we had just planted our other cover crop, and we were just kind of waiting for that to get really established. So we ended up actually doing that side in July, correct?
Yep.
Joel, I don't have all
late July. Yep.
Yeah. And again, I went through with a flail mower, and that actually the residue there was even harder. And what I'm taking from this project, and we'll see moving forward to next year, is I don't know that you can use this machine with a fully developed cover crop. I think you have to try and terminate early when the cover crop is more tender. So probably earlier in the season is what I'm going to try next year and see if we have more success. Now, I'm hoping that doesn't defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do here. But the fact of the matter is I'm trying to find out where this machine would work. And of course, we're going to try some of this early, and then we'll try some of it late. That's the great part about the way we're doing this field is we got 6 different plots going on at once here, where we're doing 3 and 3. So, we can kind of be unique in the sense of, okay, let's try X, Y, and Z on one plot and something else on the other plot, and just see, as far as the machine goes, see how that works. And then on the other end, see what's happening as far as all the soil health concerns go. So, yeah, I mean, I think this pretty much, you talked about the woodchucks. I mean, among everything else, we had severe woodchuck damage. They were out. I think they know how to swim, so they made it through it. But the reality is, it didn't really get a fair shake because, we did have early termination with some powder mildew that just came in. It was just a horrendous growing season. But I think the positives, now that we got all the negatives out, the positives are moving forward to the next 2 years. I think we have a better understanding what the machine's capabilities are. I think we have a better understanding on how to use the machine. And I can't imagine we're going to go through any more seasons like this. God, I hope not. So I think the next 2 years will be more indicative of what this machine is actually capable of doing. And then in that, more indicative of what it will do for soil health. So. Yeah.
And I think I'll just run through a few of these videos and pictures we have here just to highlight a few of the other things, show the TEF and all that. But here's a little video of it in action here.
We also have a couple questions, Joel.
Okay, yeah, we'll get to that in about 1 minute. So you can see here, this is it in action. You've got a little bit of residue built up on the side there, but it runs a little bit slower than conventional, but it's cruising through there and going through pretty dense residue, which is part of the problem, as Mike talked about. But because of that, it leaves a lot under there, to add to the soil. And then I wanted to show you what that teff looked like, since we hadn't had a picture of that. One positive outcome from this year we were able to, see that you can plant teff and it establishes a really great cover. And you can see here, Mike seeding teff with his seeder here, and it actually took really well, and it was done in about 10 minutes. So it's pretty efficient. So that's an exciting kind of way to do it. And this is the weeds in the living cover versus the teff. Leaving fallow led to 85% cover, which is pretty great. Teff seeding was about 100% cover, so obviously a little better to seed. Also, we had a lot of weed seeds developing in here, no seed developing in here. So there's, the pro to seeding versus leaving fallow, but both had a benefit in terms of, keeping the soil covered and alive. And there it is at the end of the season. Go ahead.
Let me just intervene for 1 sec, Joel. So teff is a thing that Joel actually brought to this. I had never used it, never thought of using it. Joel asked me if I would be willing to use it. And at first I was like, sure. And then I get the seed, and I don't know if anybody has ever used teff seed, but figure it's the smallest little marble that you've ever seen in your life. So I'm like, this guy's crazy. It's going to be impossible. But it actually was very easy to use. And you can tell we got a great stand right there. And that was very minimal effort. It really was very easy to use. And again, in production agriculture, I'm always looking for what is the most efficient way of doing it. And I will definitely use teff again. It was very efficient, very easy. And you can tell by these two pictures, one looks like a weedy old farm and one looks like a beautifully manicured farm. Same, and essentially it's the same amount of effort. So
yeah,
I don't know about anybody else, but I like my stuff to look nice. So yeah, I'll be using it again next year.
Yep. And next year, thinking either tomatoes or peppers, with fall planted rye terminated in flail mode. Maybe teff. I think it'd be interesting to consider other options, but we haven't quite figured that out yet. People have talked about miniature clover or other things being pretty good. But I think, definitely teff is going to be an interesting approach for these living covers. So I don't know, Mike, if you have any final words with that, but we should have Q&A. I know we've gone a little over the time.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good with some Q&A.
So thanks.
Thank you.
So we did have a couple of questions. People, I guess if you could clarify the cover crop process, like what happened in the first field over the fall, and then when you had crimson clover in the second group, and then the timings on your plantings of that and the timing on the teff.
Okay, so the cover crop, the original cover crop was clover, which we put in last fall. I don't have a no-till drill or any kind of drill yet, which actually I just got awarded one, so yay. So the way we generally do it is in one of those pictures, Joel, the picture where I'm planting the teff. I use a traditional Vicon spreader. And what I'll do is I'll generally just go over, I know what kind of poundage I'll want to put out in the field. So that one, I think I did 12 pounds.
Yep. It's about half an acre.
Yeah. So basically you just kind of weigh it up and you put it in there and you just keep driving around, you try to get it right, but if you don't get it right, you just kind of keep driving around. And generally speaking, it comes out pretty close to what you want. I mean, it's a lot easier with the bigger seed, more weight. So that's what I did. Then I go through with the harrow and just keep it very, very shallow. So it essentially just scratches the surface and kind of acts like a no-till drill. I mean, let's face it, any kind of drill disturbs soil. So I try to keep it I kind of did it a little bit too light because come to find out during the seminar, there was some undulations that somebody had pointed out in the field, and that's simply because I didn't till the field as hard as I probably should have, coming from conventional to coming to this project. So that's what we did with the first part that had the clover. That was in the last year when life was coming back to normal, we thought. And then this year I put that in. The oats I put in late March, and actually we had a great stand. It was good. The struggles were, I think I see somebody actually asking the question about management in between the rows. So really the struggles started coming once we got into this crazy rain. Like everything, it just became unbearable. You could not manage anything. You couldn't get in the fields. There's standing water. So essentially there wasn't much to maintenance this year because I couldn't get in the fields. So
we couldn't mow. We couldn't really mow either, and we didn't get it established in a timeline that made sense to mow because got the crops in, and then it rained and it rained and it rained, and we couldn't get out there very well. And then we were hoping to potentially leave a living cover in the aisle, but you can see here the machine with this small of an aisle only leaves this little bit of residue in the middle in some spots. So that was kind of the original idea of the project. That didn't work unless we widen the rows. But that gave us the opportunity to, let it just generate and see what grew there and try, a new new kind of approach with reseeding teff. So.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike, I have a question for you quick looking at this. It's Bob.
Yep.
One of the last photos that Joel showed was a pretty well-established teff, and your transplanted squash was not
swimming in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So would you maybe think of a different cover crop? Because I did looking at that it would pretty much expand into the teff, and the teff might cause a competition issue.
Yeah,
no, what I did was I actually ended up getting a mower. I have a little John Deere 1000 series, and I bought a little 4-foot mower that I went in a day or two after this because it started drying out. And I went through, and it's too bad I don't think I got a picture of that mowed. I ended up mowing it, and it did a pretty good job because there was a lot of competition here, and quite frankly, it was just one of these seasons where it's like, forget it. But once I bought that mower, I think that will be the key to trying to keep this more managed. Is you need some kind of something like that, a heavy duty mower of some sort. You can't just use a push mower. We tried it. It just won't work. So I think moving forward to next year, now that we have this 4-foot mower, I think it's going to be a little bit easier to manage this. Of course, this management style is all new to me. We have never done anything like this. So there's a little bit of a learning curve with that, a little bit of a timing learning curve, because of course we get extremely busy at this part of the season. So there's only so much time in the day. So management of this became kind of an issue as well, because of course you're reduced with your time when you're fighting rain anyways. I think hopefully moving forward to next year, it's more of a normal year, and we'll have more time to devote to management.
Michael, there was another question about the FORIGO machine.
Yep.
I don't know if, sorry, Catherine, interrupt. I know that we're already like 10 minutes over. I don't know if we have time for more questions. Finney, maybe one more. Do you think that we should move on?
Sure, whatever. I'll answer this one question.
Sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
Basically, the question is, how does it help to bury stones?
So it's the design of the rototiller. Instead of going forward, it goes backwards. And don't ask me why, because it's all contained in that system. But literally it'll take, they said basketball size. I didn't find that to be true, but it would take a cantaloupe size, and literally you can't see it. So it would somehow pulverize the soil enough, but we found it wasn't really disturbing that far down. It was maybe What would you say it was, Joel? 4 inches?
Not very far, yeah. I think 4 to
So-
6 inches, and then there's like these densely packed stones. So something I'm concerned about that we didn't measure is whether or not there might be compaction in the rows or some sort of root inhibition where those stones were pushed down versus, you know, doing the hard work of taking them out of there like you do, like you have to with the other equipment that doesn't do that.
Yeah. And then on the backside, in the video, you don't really see it, but what it has is a roller that is powered. So that roller leaves a smooth type of finish and again helps to kind of settle the stones in place. And I'll tell you, it worked really good. It did get jammed on a couple big stones. But I was impressed with what it could manage. It doesn't crush them, it just buries them. So yeah, we'll see that next year. Hopefully it works a little bit better now that we're getting a little bit better with it. So